All right, so digital inking has a lot of benefits, not the least of which is being able to erase your mistakes and really refine it. My issue with it is that when all is said and done, it still looks very digital most of the time. And you can use fancy brushes and different techniques we'll be learning later to make it more unique as a digital drawing. But since ultimately all we need here for this project is line work, you get to decide whether doing it digitally is the best option for you. I will do digital inking right in Illustrator if I'm doing something that's really exacting and technical, like perfect spheres, rectangles, plots, diagrams, things like that. But when it comes to character drawings, I don't have as much freedom, I feel, when I do them digitally as when I actually ink them by hand. So let me show you, for this to be finished, on top of those basic shapes, I would turn off those sketch layers and see what I have. And if you're into web comics, this is a very efficient way to do things, to just draw it all in the computer, ink it all in the computer, color it all in the computer. But as you'll notice from most web comics, you can tell that they've done that. It doesn't have that handmade aesthetic of slightly more edge variation that I admire. All right, so let's say that's the digital inking I'm thinking of for this piece. Throw some shading in there. I gotta work on that face, but I'm not gonna worry about it right now. What I would do is turn off the sketch layer underneath, and you see that looks very digital. So it would take more work and maybe a few more alterations of brush size. Because even though we can change, or we can make it pressure sensitive, we can't really get the sensitivity that we can with hand use without really expensive equipment. All right. And then I would turn off the white, and then I would save that as a PNG. And notice I thickened my brush since I did this, so I can still go back, right-click on this line. Whoops, let's see. Where's my vector? There we go. Right-click on that and say Stroke Path. Now say Brush, and it will thicken it to match the brush I'm currently using. So I can find the right thickness. That's a little too thick. The one before was a little too thin. But I just saved that as a PNG, as a test, to the desktop to take into Illustrator. And then the same steps apply. And then that PNG will vectorize very well because all the marks were made in the computer in the first place. Okay, now this sketch is a little bit more refined. And I think I can use the same settings pretty much. And I can try to get this to an inking that I like. Now, often when you're doing curves and you're doing final inking, this is another reason I like hand inking, it's very helpful to pivot the paper. So it's really hard to draw a curve up like that. So you can use this hand tool near the bottom, we haven't used it before, to tilt the paper should you want. And you do that by double clicking on it, or not double clicking, just holding down on it, and you go to the rotate hand tool. And then I can rotate the paper and then ink it with the paper in a better position for the curves. And for inking curves, it's good to connect them at certain places. So you see that's a lot better than this. So I can just erase that one. Oh, I made a mistake. Stupid mistake from the beginning. I didn't create a duplicate layer to ink on, so let me go back before I make that mistake again. Okay, so new layer. This is my ink layer. Now I can get those curves at the angle I want. I like to handle the tricky curves first. And then I can use that rotate hand tool and move it the other way for the other side, just like you would move a sketchbook around. Inking on a separate layer is just like using tracing paper, right? So it can be isolated. Silly not to. It was a dumb mistake on my part. Things you want to recognize early. And everyone will make plenty of mistakes. So this is more of an animated style, so I'm going to really push the thick and thins of the lines, which will really help with the vector line work, make it more compelling, and ultimately really sell the coloring a lot more. When you want to undo the rotation, you just double click on the rotate hand tool and it will take you back to upright orientation. Now some people like to have really smooth inking technique. This is what I call an animator's line. You never lift the pen until you're done with the stroke. Keep it really clean. That's to look very professional, a lot like animation. But it doesn't mean that's what you have to do. That's your own artwork. The other type of line I call a sketch line, and that's where you break up your lines a lot. So I'll show you that in the fur. I'm going to try to keep all of this looking as clean as an animator's line as I can. And when you make a mistake, instead of just automatically erasing it, see if you can incorporate it into your ink work. You know, just like thicken maybe the inside of this ring. And of course, digitally you can also zoom in. You don't need a magnifying glass like you would in a studio. So once I get these big structures nice and smooth, get the ear here, then I can work with a more sketchy line for the textures. A sketchy line starts and stops a lot, but each stroke might be individual and might go from thick to thin on its own. And you'll see more and more illustration styles like that with variation entering into animation and commercial practice. Styles like the regular show or Adventure Time. More independent styles. So for texturing, especially things like the horns, I might switch to a slightly smaller size, and I might use a more sketchy, disconnected line quality. Not worrying so much about it. And the eyebrows, I might give little bits of variation in the fur, in the skin, whiskers, tufts of hair coming from his ears. That's good for kind of a sketchier approach. And digital is good for that too, though it's hard for digital to keep up with lots and lots of mark making at high resolutions. But you want it to be clean line work. Okay, the heavier you ink, the simpler your color will be, because most of your value decisions and lighting decisions will already be made. That doesn't mean you always want to ink a lot. It just depends on what you're going for. So I'm kind of self-consciously over-inking this now, making it a little bit darker than it needs to be. just so you can kind of see the difference. And now that line work, that would work really well as its own vector as well to work with. You can thicken lines, make them what you want. See, I darkened into the V's where they get kind of too light. I'll darken them up so they don't distract. Yeah, that could work. And sometimes you want to do echo shapes, especially for spot illustrations. Kind of build it up a little bit outside, especially with organic textures, so that the shapes contain themselves with similar shapes. That's too much there. All right. And you save that as a test. PNG. To the desktop. So those are all the different ways that you might use Photoshop to create line work for vectorization. And then, of course, you open it in Illustrator. I'll just do it with this one for now. And you clean it as much as you can, just using the live trace settings. And then, of course, you can always alter the vector output after in Illustrator. So lots and lots of options. But from that to something much, much cleaner as soon as Illustrator opens. Animators are known for being very sketchy. And so it's ironic that an animator's line is so clean and fluid, because it's always informed by such sketchiness and such movement to really keep that life into the drawing. Not too happy with that teeth design they did. So if it were my own, I would change it, but I'm just using it as a demo. On the whole, though, a very nice design. All right, where is it in Illustrator? Come on. Open up. Yeah, Illustrator is still waking up for me. Okay. Something's coming in.
We save it as an EPS, right?
Yes, so you'll save it as an EPS. So there you see my digital. This is the first time I've brought pure digital line work into Illustrator. And it already looks pretty good. It's just as a raster file, right? So if we image trace it, I'm going to just try to click it and let it use its defaults. It's going to kind of scan it and see what it thinks, because there's no color artifacts. There's no variation at all. So that's now the vector. I just want to make sure that whites are ignored. So I'm going to say ignore white, which I think Illustrator should be able to tell from bringing in a transparent PNG, but sometimes it can't. And now I look at it, and I think, yeah, that's pretty right on, but I can mess with its threshold a little bit, see if that makes any difference. It shouldn't make much, but it can kind of slim down your lines a little bit. And yeah, that looks good. So the benefit of digital linking is that you can get a very close vectorization. And then I'm going to expand it, and now I have a clean vector of that I'll save as an EPS. And I don't even save them as AI files. I don't bother, because it's just in and out. All right. Now this one would be a fun one to color. And it'd be a sticker I'd kind of like. But it's not my design, so gotta go with my designs. All right. Now some other examples that I